So this morning, we're continuing our series on knowing God. And today we're going to focus on knowing God through His creation. So I was going to start with a little story, actually true story, when I was younger. Since we baptized the new baby today, kind of reminded me of this. So when I was a child, maybe 3 or 4, I remember my mom did a lot of embroidery. Did anyone know what embroidery? It's like this pattern, this mesh with kind of an image on it, and they use different threads, colors, and they make something, okay? Whether it's a picture of a landscape or whatever. And I remember I would always be sitting under her feet as she was doing this constantly. I would be sitting under her feet and I would look up, and all I saw was the back of that canvas. And on the back, all I saw were these different color strings, black and white and yellow and greens. And I remember this actually thinking, what is this mess? Because that's what it looked like. She insisted that she was making a picture, a beautiful picture that we're going to frame. And I looked at it and I said, that's nice. All I see are a bunch of colors that they don't even match. And it wasn't until what she would do, she would pick me up and put me on her knee and then show me what it looked like from her angle. And what it looked like from her angle was this beautiful scene starting to appear. And I tell you the story, I'm going to come back to it, but just thinking as when we're thinking with the mind of sometimes children, which a lot of times really that's what we are, we're still growing. The way things appear to us are not always the way they truly are. And it's not always the way it is from God's view. So I'm going to leave you with that story as I usually do. What I want to do is, I don't know, could we dim the light? Yeah, maybe. But I'll read this. I was using a mouse. So I wanted to read to you Psalm 19, just verses 1 to 7, because that psalm, and if you're reading an Orthodox Bible, it's actually Psalm 18 in the Orthodox Bible. I wanted to read those 7 verses to you because those 7 verses really kind of frame what we're talking about. Okay, either I'm keep getting taller or this keeps going down, but either way. So, first 7 verses of Psalm 19. The heavens, and this is David, of course, writing this, saying this. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament, or the sky, shows the creation of His hands. Day to day utters speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voices are not heard. Their proclamation went forth into all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. In the sun He set His tabernacle, and it rejoices exceedingly. Like a bridegroom coming forth from his bridal chamber, like a strong man to run a race. Its rising is from one end of heaven, and its circuit runs to the other end, and nothing shall be hidden from its heat. Why I like those verses is because, and it depends whether you're reading, this happens to be from the Orthodox Bible. I actually like, in the New King James Bible, it's a little different. Some editions have slightly different words, but it means the same thing. And the reason I like those verses because it kind of frames what God's creation, how God's creation actually talks to us, how it communicates God's presence and His words. And I'm going to tackle these verses a little bit one by one. So, one of the things that I'm going to kind of pose this to you to kind of think about for a minute or two. God's creation declares His glory. So, from those the first two verses in that psalm, the heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament shows the creation of His hands. Day to day utters His speech. So, God's creation declares His glory. I put 3 bullet points there. The heavens speak forth the praises of God. The heavens reveal knowledge of God to man. And God's testimony to Himself in creation is unmistakable. I put those up there. I want you to think about those bullet points for a minute. Maybe get together, talk about it. And then I want to get back to it. But first I want to read, before I leave you for a couple of minutes, in Romans chapter 1, verse 20. I just want to read that to you and see if it resonates. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Think about those for a minute or two. I'm just going to sit over here and discuss it together, and then we'll re-engage in the discussion. If you think from the beginning, from the book of Genesis, as God is creating, forming His creations. Think about how He didn't just settle for, let's create man in our image. Of course, that's the first kind of, so we actually all are the image of God, so that's something, a point to keep in mind. But also how He went beyond just saying, well, let's give, this guy some food and an animal or two, to keep him company. No, He just poured, kind of like the farmer's market example that Irini gave, just poured a plethora of colors and flying creatures of all different kinds and colors and flowers and birds and animals and waters and trees, and He just pours. It's kind of that canvas that I was talking about with the different colors. Sometimes we don't see because we don't connect the dots, but God just overwhelmingly speaks through those creations. So whenever, when you're outside, sometimes I was with a middle school group of kids a couple of years ago, and we took them on a retreat, and it happened to be kind of in the middle of nowhere, in the woods. Not in the woods, I don't want it to sound like creepy, but it was kind of like in a camp, but it was pitch black. But even in the pitch black, as they were sitting there around the campfire, and they started to look up to the sky, and of course there was no light pollution, and they started seeing millions of stars and insects and all sorts of creatures in the background. And one of them came up and told me, God created all this stuff for us. Why? But it is beautiful. He couldn't explain why, but just knew that, wow, that God created this for them, for us, just so He could put a smile on our face from a child's perspective. So it's just, whether it's dark, whether it's light, I'm going to take you through a different, that last bullet, God's testimony to himself in creation is also unmistakable. I know that's a very rich quote. Anyone think about that? What that means? Or how we can explain that? Do you believe it? No? I see the reflection coming, you know.
I think the thought was maybe that was a reference to God reflecting on each day of his creation, each of the 7 days. And after he finished each day, he said, all was good, so he rested. So we thought that might have been a reference to that.
Okay. That's good. Any more?
Man is not capable of nearly a fraction of such a creation.
So God's testimony to himself in creation is unmistakable. Do we believe that? I mean, that's really what, because remember, how do we know God through his creation? It's easy, and by the way, it's not, because people misunderstand that, and non-believers sometimes say, oh, well, nature. It's not about nature, okay? Because people will say, oh, Mother Nature, okay, is all around us. So there is no God. All these things are gods. Remember, even ancient cultures believed every one of these things was a god. There's a sun god, a moon god, tree god. If it existed, it had a god. But that's not what we're talking about. So the testimony to himself in creation. What is the biggest testimony, the most important creation? Us, okay. So how are we a testimony?
By knowing that he created us and therefore praising him for it.
I think in our actions, in love, and what we do and how we give back, and our kindness, our generosity, the good parts of us.
Right.
And the bad.
And the bad, yeah. There's.
And I think our part also in taking care of the rest of creation.
Right.
God created us and took care of us, takes care of us. And as the crown of his creation, we extend that to the rest of creation around us.
Okay. If you notice, God also, when he did create us, just to talk about that abundance of his creation, even things we don't see, he didn't just settle for a basic creation. He speaks through his creation by creating things that are so intricate. If you think about every cell in our body, put that under an electron microscope, even within that little cell that we can't see, there's life in that cell. And there's life inside the things in the cell. If you think about that, it is overwhelming. It is amazing. It's like, to me, it's a message of God's, he's huge. He's amazing. He's overwhelming in many ways. And it's hard to understand sometimes. I'm going to go to the next screen. I know this is a lot. It's a good thing we didn't have food or something, So this I kind of thought about after, and this kind of goes into the next few verses in Psalm 19. I'm going to read the verses again, 3, 4, and 5. Day to day utters speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voices are not heard. Their proclamation went forth into all the earth. What is he talking about? If you look at these bullet points, God's creation speaks to all people everywhere. And I have 3 bullet points there. There is no language barrier. It is understood by all. There is no volume barrier. It is heard by all. There is no distance barriers. It is given to all. I want you to think about those points for, we'll give it 5 minutes. Think about those, relating that to Psalm 19, and think about what the message is there. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if we truly look at God's creation as us understanding God or He speaking to us, I mean, there were some points here that came, several from both groups, is that if you think about it, no matter where you are in the world, or where you live, or where what your social status is, you still see the stars at night. You still see trees. You still see, so some of you were saying about, what if we didn't have the internet? What if you didn't have the physical Bible? What if you didn't have language? But the most common language we have is God through His creation, because none of us it's not hidden from any of us. So, and that's where there's no language barrier. We can all understand, no matter where, if I were to fly now to some remote area in Africa, even if I didn't know the language or the culture, I do know one thing. I will see the stars at night. I will see the sun during the day. And every day. And that's God's kind of common language, the sound of His creations, His creatures that He created. We all hear the same sounds. There's no distance barrier, no matter where I go. I can go to the North Pole, and I'll still see the stars at night. And that was really, and that's what the psalmist is talking about, David, is that where he says, their proclamation went forth into all the earth. There's no excuse. Everyone sees it. Everyone hears it. I think I'm going backwards. Okay. Just one last point, and we can discuss this together, and I just use this. He mentions the sun. The sun is an example of God's revelation in creation. The sun is this perfect example of, we all see its light anywhere in the world. We all feel its heat. It helps to grow things all over the world. It's the same sun. So it's God's language. If you look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 45, or was it chapter, 5? Yeah, chapter 5, verse 4. That you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. That verse actually is kind of brings all these things together, is that this is His language. This is how we know Him. Remember, going back to the original topic, knowing God through His creation. It is the common language. When we talk to others who are unbelievers, some of you mentioned Albert Einstein. I had read that interview with Albert Einstein in 1929, I just mentioned, I think in the Washington Post, and you can Google it, where he talked about, someone asked him, aren't you an atheist? And he said, I think I am, but now I'm thinking towards the end of his life that I'm not, because I can't explain everything through science. I look at His creations, and I look at the amazing, endless universe, and I can't explain it. There's got to be a being that's greater. And that's something, actually, if you Google that, it was in 1929, you could read the whole thing. And that's where God speaks to us. That's how He speaks to us. again, looking up at the sky, someone has gotta, it speaks to all of us, and it's a common language. Questions, other points? I just wanted to just help us to think a little bit about this. It's a very deep thing, as some of you said, espresso. Next time we'll bring an espresso machine. It is a deep topic. And we know, as people who are faithful, who are believers, that yes, everything we see around us is God's creation. The tricky part sometimes is those who are not believers. How can we use the creation around us to explain God? That really is the tricky part. No, actually, it's not tricky. And part of our discussions today is to kind of help us think about that a little bit. How can I explain to someone who says I'm an atheist? Explain God to them through what they can see and feel, what they can touch. Yeah. The beauty of it is, going back to Abuna's point, is that it's a constant message. It's there all the time. So I love the idea of, even if I don't have my Bible, Irini was trying to pull up the Bible and she didn't have internet access or whatever, but you don't have to. If you step outside and it helps you to remember, he's talking to us constantly, and we just need to listen.